The silence in my house was so complete, you could hear a heart break. And on my 75th birthday, that heart was mine. The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from a lifetime ago, ticked with a solemn, judgmental rhythm. Tick. You are alone. Tock. You have been forgotten. I had spent the afternoon baking, not a grand, tiered affair, but a small, perfect lemon and rosemary cake, David's favorite. The scent, which usually filled the kitchen with warmth, felt thin and pointless in the empty air. I'd set the dining table for 4. My best china, the kind I only used for special occasions. A plate for me, one for David, one for his wife Chloe, and one for their daughter Mia, my only grandchild. 4 polished forks, 4 folded linen napkins, 4 empty chairs. The sun had set hours ago, casting long, distorted shadows across the pristine lawn of my Maple Creek home. The Oregon sky had bled from orange to a deep, bruised purple. It was 2025, a world of instant connection, yet here I was, an island of disconnect. I'd checked my phone every 5 minutes since 3 o'clock. At first, with hopeful anticipation, then with a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Now with a dull, hollow ache. No calls, no texts, just the bright, indifferent screen staring back at me. They said they'd be here by 4. We'll pop over after Mia's soccer practice, Mom. Just a quick visit, but we'll be there. David's voice on the phone yesterday had been rushed, distracted, but he'd said the words. He'd promised. I walked back to the dining room and looked at the cake sitting in the center of the table. I had placed a single slender white candle in the middle of it. It looked lonely, pathetic. I ran my hand along the back of David's empty chair, the wood cool and unfeeling beneath my palm. For 20 years since he'd married Chloe, I had felt this slow, creeping obsolescence. I had become a function, a utility. The reliable babysitter when Mia was young, the emergency contact, the giver of sensible, unexciting Christmas gifts they'd return for store credit, the keeper of family history they were never interested in hearing. I had accepted it because what else was there to do? You love your children, you make allowances, you tell yourself they're just busy. You swallow the hurt until it becomes a part of you, a dull throb you barely notice anymore. But today felt different. 75, a milestone, a number that felt both impossibly old and strangely insignificant. I'd woken up this morning feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet hope. Maybe today they would see me. Not the function, not the utility, but me, Elizabeth. The woman who raised him, who read him bedtime stories and patched his scraped knees, the woman who loved him more than she loved her own life. The clock struck 9. The sound echoed through the silent house like a judge's gavel. It was official. They weren't coming. The excuse would come tomorrow, or the day after. A frantic text from Chloe. "Oh my God, Liz, I am so sorry. Yesterday was just insane." A rushed call from David. "Mom, things got crazy. Mia had a mountain of homework. We'll make it up to you, I promise." The promises were always as empty as the chairs at my table. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over David's contact photo. Should I call? Demand an explanation? The thought exhausted me. The ensuing conversation would be a carefully choreographed dance of their flimsy excuses and my forced acceptance. I couldn't do it. Not tonight. My thumb, acting of its own accord, drifted to the bright, colorful icon of Instagram. I rarely used it. It was Chloe's world, a curated gallery of a life so perfect, it felt like fiction. I opened the app, and there it was. At the top of the screen. A new story from Chloe, posted 1 hour ago. My heart didn't just break, it stopped. The first image was a professionally lit, artfully arranged platter of oysters, glistening on a bed of ice. The location tag was a sharp, painful sting. Viña, a trendy, ridiculously expensive new restaurant in downtown Portland I'd read about in a magazine. The kind of place you had to book weeks in advance. The kind of place you went for a celebration. I tapped the screen. The next photo was a selfie. Chloe, her face flawless, her lips pursed in a triumphant pout. David smiling beside her, a glass of red wine in his hand, his eyes crinkling in that way they did when he was genuinely happy. And Mia, a teenager now, beautiful and bored in the way only teenagers can be, picking at a piece of artisanal bread. They were radiant, they were happy, they were a family. And then, the final slide. A video, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of the crowded restaurant. Chloe's voice, bright and carefree. To us, spontaneous family nights are the best. David laughed and leaned in to kiss her. Mia rolled her eyes but smiled, and below the video, the caption, written in a jaunty, carefree font, "Family time is the best time. #blessed her family first, #making memories." No mention of me, no hint of a forgotten obligation. This wasn't a last-minute change of plans. This wasn't a case of things got crazy. This was a choice. They had planned this. They had booked a table, dressed up, and driven into the city to celebrate. Something. Anything but me. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It was erasure. It was a declaration that my milestone, my existence, was so far from their minds that it didn't even register as a conflict. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of theirs. A cold, calm clarity washed over me, chilling the burn of the initial shock. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I had shed enough of them in private over the last 20 years to fill an ocean. This was something else, a quiet tectonic shift deep within me. The slow, grinding plates of duty and love and silent suffering had finally, irrevocably, cracked. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. I walked to the kitchen, retrieved a matchbook from the junk drawer, and returned to the dining room. I struck a match, the hiss and flare of it unnaturally loud in the silence. I lit the single white candle on the cake. The small flame flickered, casting a warm, dancing glow on my face. I looked at the 3 empty chairs, at the pristine, untouched place settings. Then I looked at the lonely flame. I closed my eyes, made a wish, not for them, but for me, and blew it out. The wisp of smoke curled upwards into the darkness, carrying with it the last remnants of the woman I used to be. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window with an almost offensive cheerfulness. I had slept, but it was a thin, dreamless sleep that offered no rest. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean. I made my coffee, the ritual familiar and grounding, and sat at the kitchen table. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The uneaten cake was on the counter, a silent monument to yesterday's betrayal. I ignored it. Today was the first of the month. A day that for 2 decades had been marked by another, heavier ritual. I opened my laptop, the screen blinking to life. I navigated to my online banking portal. The page loaded, familiar and sterile. 2 primary accounts were listed. My own checking account and a joint savings account I'd shared with my late husband, Richard, and under the bill pay section, 2 scheduled payments. The first was small, for the property taxes and insurance on my own modest paid-off home. The second was much, much larger. It was labeled simply, David and Chloe Miller, Mortgage. For 20 years, on the first of every month, I had made this payment. It was an arrangement Richard had set up just after they married. He had presented it to me not as a discussion, but as a declaration. He had just sold a portion of his stock portfolio and used it as a down payment on a sprawling, new construction house in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. A house for David and Chloe, a house I would pay the mortgage on. I remember his words as if he were standing right here in the kitchen, his voice laced with that self-satisfied authority he always wore like a well-tailored suit. It's an investment in family, Elizabeth. The best investment we can make. We're giving our boy a foundation, a head start I never had. He'd called it our investment, but the money came from an inheritance of mine that he managed, and the payment came from the account I was now solely responsible for. I never saw the house as a foundation. I saw it as a chain, a golden, beautifully landscaped chain, but a chain nonetheless. It bound me to them, a monthly reminder of my duty, my role. Richard had been gone for a year now, but the arrangement, like the ghost of his presence, lingered. He had structured his will to ensure it. A significant portion of his assets were in a trust, and I was the trustee. The trust's primary, legally stipulated purpose was to provide for the welfare and security of his son. And to Richard, security meant that big, ostentatious house. He had, in death as in life, made sure I was kept in my place, dutifully servicing the life he had built for his son. My finger hovered over the confirm payment button. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. For 240 consecutive months, I had clicked this button without a second thought. It was just what I did. But today, the image of Chloe's triumphant smile on Instagram was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The sound of their clinking glasses echoed in my ears. Family time is the best time. An investment in family. What a bitter joke that felt now. What kind of family erases one of its own members? What kind of investment requires one person to pour their resources into a black hole of ingratitude? The house wasn't a home for family. It was a stage for Chloe's performance of a perfect life, a life in which I was a barely remembered prop, brought out only when needed. I was paying for the very stage on which they celebrated my obsolescence. The cursor blinked, patient and mocking. Click the button. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. It was the mantra of my entire adult life. Richard had been a man who hated waves. He valued order, control, and a smooth, placid surface. I had learned early in our marriage that my role was to be the still water he sailed upon. And I had played my part well, so well in fact that I had forgotten how to swim on my own. But Richard was gone. The captain of the ship was no longer on the bridge, and the still water was starting to churn. The forgotten birthday wasn't the cause. It was just the final, unbearable pressure point on a crack that had been widening for years. A crack in the facade of the perfect family. A crack in my own long-suffering silence. My hand was trembling, not from age or weakness, but from a strange, terrifying new sensation. Rage. It was a cold, quiet rage, but it was powerful. It was the rage of a woman who had finally realized the cage she was in was one she had helped maintain. I stared at the number on the screen. The mortgage payment was more than my entire monthly Social Security check. It was a staggering sum that could have funded a trip around the world, a new car, a life of my own choosing. Instead, it was funding their new patio furniture. It was paying for the roof over their heads while they toasted a life that had no room for me. My finger moved away from the confirm payment button. I just sat there, staring at the screen, as the cheerful morning sun illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in 20 years, I did nothing. I let the cursor blink. I let the payment remain pending. It was a small, passive act of defiance. A silent scream into the digital void. And it felt like the first breath of fresh air I had taken in decades. The house remained quiet for the rest of the day. The silence, which had been oppressive the night before, now felt different. It felt like potential, a blank slate. I moved through the hours in a daze, the unspoken decision I'd made humming just beneath my skin. I didn't clean up the dining room. The cake and the 4 place settings remained, a stark reminder of the turning point. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that something had changed forever. The phone rang late the next afternoon. The caller ID flashed a picture of Chloe, a filtered, smiling selfie taken on a beach somewhere exotic. My stomach clenched. For a moment, the old instincts kicked in. Answer. Be pleasant. Pretend everything is fine. But the cold resolve from the day before was still there, a new and unfamiliar hardness in my core. I let it ring a 4th time before answering, my own small power play. Hello? I kept my voice neutral, flat. Liz? Hi? Chloe's voice was a confection of spun sugar and condescension. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. How are you doing? The question was so absurd, so utterly devoid of genuine interest, that I almost laughed. I'm here, Chloe. What can I do for you? There was a slight pause, as if she was taken aback by my lack of warmth. Well, I was just calling to check in. Things have been so hectic. I saw, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It looked like you had a lovely dinner in Portland. The line went silent for a beat. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she processed my words. Oh, right. Yes. It was just a last-minute thing. David got a bonus, and we just wanted to do something special for Mia. She's been so stressed with school. You know how it is. I see, I said. And how is my 75th birthday a less special occasion than Mia's stress over a history paper? The sugary sweetness in her voice curdled instantly, replaced by a sharp, defensive edge. Oh, Liz, don't be so dramatic. We were going to call you. I literally had my phone in my hand to text you, and then David's boss called, and one thing led to another. It completely slipped my mind. We'll celebrate next week. I'll take you to lunch. A lunch. A pity lunch to absolve her of her guilt. The offer was an insult. Don't trouble yourself, I said, my voice as cold as ice. Fine, she huffed, her patience clearly gone. The pretense of caring was dropped. It was time to get to the real reason for her call. Anyway, the real reason I was calling is that I was just checking our accounts, and I didn't see the mortgage payment go through. Did you handle it? It's usually there by the 2nd of the month. There it was. Not, Mom, are you okay? Not, I am so deeply sorry for hurting you. Just, did you handle the payment? I was not a mother. I was a bank teller. You see, she continued, her voice regaining a wheedling explanatory tone. We just bought the most amazing new patio set. It's imported from Italy, and it totally transforms the backyard. But we put it on the credit card, and the bill is just astronomical. We were counting on not having to worry about the house payment to free up some cash flow. You understand? I understood perfectly. I understood that my feelings, my milestone, my very personhood, were worth less than a set of Italian patio furniture. I understood that for 20 years, I had not been investing in family. I had been subsidizing a lifestyle. I had been funding the acquisition of things that were used to signal a status they hadn't earned. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my hesitation burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. The plan, which had been a vague, rebellious fantasy just a day before, crystallized in my mind, sharp and clear. I took a deep breath, picturing the banking portal on my laptop screen. I pictured the blinking cursor, the unconfirmed payment. Then I pictured Chloe's smug, filtered face on my phone. Yes, Chloe, I said, and I was shocked at how calm and steady my voice sounded. It was the voice of a stranger. It's all taken care of. The relief in her sigh was audible, a gust of wind that carried all her manufactured concern away with it. Oh, thank God, you're a lifesaver, Liz. I don't know what we'd do without you. Okay, well, I have to run. Talk soon. We'll do that lunch. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. I don't know what we'd do without you. The words, meant to be a compliment, sounded like a threat. But they no longer held any power over me. They were about to find out exactly what they would do without me. I walked back to my laptop, my steps firm and purposeful. I sat down and opened the banking portal again. The pending payment was still there, waiting. I looked at it for a long moment, a final farewell to 2 decades of servitude. Then, with a decisive click, I canceled it. The screen refreshed and the pending payment disappeared. My hands moved quickly, surely across the keyboard. I navigated to the Open a New Account section. I selected a high-yield savings account. The application was simple. Name, address, social security number. Then came the field. Account nickname. I paused. This account was more than just a place to put money. It was a declaration of independence. It was a war chest. It was the beginning of the end of their comfortable, subsidized life. I typed in the name, the Reckoning Fund. Then I went to the transfer page. I selected the joint savings account Richard had left, the one from which the mortgage was always paid, and I transferred the exact amount of David and Chloe's mortgage payment, plus an extra $10,000 for good measure, into the Reckoning Fund. I clicked Confirm Transfer. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen, accompanied by the words, "Your transaction is complete." It was done. A quiet, simple act of digital rebellion. No shouting, no confrontation, just a few clicks of a mouse. But in the silent, sunlit kitchen, it felt as loud as a cannon blast. I had not just moved money. I had shifted the foundation of our entire family. I had taken the first step on a path from which there was no return. And as I closed the laptop, a slow, unfamiliar smile spread across my face. The house was still quiet, but for the first time in a very long time, it no longer felt empty. It felt like my own. The lie to Chloe tasted like metal in her mouth, a flavor of rust and victory that lingered long after the call ended. It was a foreign taste. For 75 years, Elizabeth had been a creature of truth, of quiet compliance. Now, a single, simple untruth had cracked open a door inside her, and a cold, invigorating draft was blowing through the dusty corridors of her life. The money, meant for David and Chloe's mortgage, sat in a newly opened savings account under her name alone. The numbers on the screen glowed with a defiant light. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a beginning. It was a boundary. Fueled by this strange new energy, a kind of brittle, furious courage, her eyes landed on the closed door at the end of the hall. Richard's study. For the year since his death, it had remained his sovereign territory. A sealed tomb. She hadn't just avoided it, she had orbited it, like a moon trapped in the gravity of a dead planet. His scent of cedar and old paper still clung to the wood. His presence was a stain on the air within. To open that door felt like sacrilege. Today, it felt like a necessity. She turned the cold brass knob. The air that met her was stale, thick with the silence of a year's neglect. It was exactly as he'd left it, a shrine to a man of order and control. The mahogany desk was clear, save for a single, perfectly aligned pen. The leather-bound books stood at attention on the shelves, a silent army of his intellect. The faint, sweet smell of his pipe tobacco was a ghost in the upholstery of the wingback chair. For a moment, the old grief, the familiar weight of the widow, threatened to crush her newfound rebellion. She had loved this man, or she had loved the idea of him she had been permitted to know. But the image of Chloe's dismissive smirk, seen only in her mind's eye, was a sharpened stone in her pocket. The memory of her son's casual betrayal was a fire at her back. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here to dismantle. She started with the books. One by one, she pulled them from the shelves. Shakespeare, biographies of Churchill and Roosevelt, volumes on finance and market strategy, the pillars of his world. She didn't pack them. She dropped them onto the floor with a series of dull, satisfying thuds. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon light, disturbed for the first time in a year. It was a small desecration, but it was hers. The largest bookshelf, a heavy, dark wood monstrosity, was her final target. It was filled with encyclopedias and leather-bound classics he'd never read, but insisted on displaying. It was a monument to his intellectual vanity. She put her shoulder to it, expecting it to be immovable. But her life of gardening, of hauling soil and stone, had left a surprising strength in her 75-year-old frame. She grunted, pushed, and the bookshelf scraped a half-inch across the hardwood floor. And that's when she heard it. Not a scrape. A click. She froze. The sound was small, mechanical, and entirely out of place. She pushed the bookshelf again. Another inch. This time, she saw it. A section of the wood-paneled wall behind the shelf, a perfect square about 2 feet wide, had shifted. It was no longer flush with the rest of the paneling. Her heart began to beat a different rhythm, a low thrum of adrenaline and dread. She moved the heavy bookshelf the rest of the way, her breath catching in her throat. There, set perfectly into the wall, was something that did not belong in her husband's world. It wasn't a hidden space. It was a safe, but not Richard's safe. Richard, a man who had lived through the Great Depression with his parents, had a profound distrust of anything he couldn't physically touch. His safe was an old, black iron beast with a clunky combination dial tucked away in their bedroom closet, filled with property deeds and his will. This was different. This was sleek gray metal. It was flush-mounted, seamless. It had a digital keypad, its dark screen lifeless. It was modern. It was secret. It was a piece of technology Richard would have sneered at, calling it flimsy and unreliable. And yet, here it was, hidden behind the heaviest object in his shrine. A secret he had kept with 21st-century technology while presenting himself as a man of the 19th. A cold wave washed over Elizabeth. What part of this man had she ever really known? The locksmith was a young man with kind eyes and a username, Codecracker88, stitched onto his work shirt. Elizabeth had found him on a local service app, the kind Chloe used for everything from dog walkers to grocery delivery. She met him at the door, her hands clasped together to stop their trembling. "I feel so foolish," she began, the lie she'd rehearsed coming out more smoothly than she'd expected. "It's an old family safe. My late husband's. I can't for the life of me remember the combination," he said. "My memory isn't what it used to be." The young man, whose name was Ben, just nodded sympathetically. "Happens all the time, ma'am. Don't you worry. Most of these digital models have a master reset or a bypass. Let's take a look." He followed her to the study, his large toolbox clanking softly. He whistled when he saw the safe. "Oh yeah, this is a nice one. Top of the line. Your husband had good taste in security." Elizabeth just hummed in response, watching him work. He plugged a small device that looked like a smartphone into a nearly invisible port at the base of the safe. He tapped at the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the clicking of Ben's device and the frantic thumping of Elizabeth's own heart. She felt a bizarre mix of terror and anticipation. What was in there? Cash. Richard didn't trust banks, but he trusted a hidden digital safe. It didn't add up. Was it something else? Something worse? After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, there was a soft electronic chime. A green light flashed above the keypad. "There we go," Ben said, looking pleased. "Should be open now." He turned a small, inset handle, and the heavy metal door swung open with a whisper of pressurized air. Ben stepped back, respectful of her privacy. "All yours, ma'am." Elizabeth peered into the dark recess. Her first feeling was one of profound disappointment. It was empty, or nearly. There was no glittering pile of gold, no stacks of cash bound in paper bands. The cavernous metal box held only 2 items, sitting side by side in the center of the velvet-lined shelf. One was a simple manila folder, thick with what looked like legal papers. The other was a book. It was bound in dark, worn leather, about the size of a paperback novel, held shut by a Browning elastic strap. There were no words on the cover. It was utterly anonymous. "Is everything okay?" Ben asked, sensing her strange stillness. Yes, thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. She paid him, her hands fumbling with the cash, her eyes never leaving the 2 objects in the safe. After he left, she closed the study door, shutting herself in with Richard's secret. She reached for the book first. The leather was soft, almost supple, under her fingertips. She slipped off the elastic band, and the book fell open in her hands, its pages full of dense, looping cursive. The ink was a faded blue. On the first page, in the top right corner, was a name and a date. Sophia, May, 1999. Sophia. The name meant nothing to her. She began to read. The first few entries were a whirlwind of emotion, a storm of words that felt both illicit and intoxicating. Sophia wrote not with grace, but with a frantic, desperate energy. "He looked at me today." Across the room, at the fundraiser, everyone was talking to him, trying to get his attention, the great Richard Sterling. But his eyes found me. It was like a physical touch. I felt it on my skin. He has a wife, I know. A quiet, pretty thing who stands beside him like a shadow. But he looked at me. Elizabeth's breath caught. She sat heavily in Richard's wingback chair, the diary held in a white-knuckled grip. Her fundraiser, the hospital benefit she had organized. She remembered that night. She'd worn a pale blue dress. She'd felt proud, standing next to her handsome, successful husband. A shadow. Had that's what she'd been? She read on, her world tilting on its axis. The diary chronicled the beginning of an affair, secret lunches, phone calls from untraceable numbers, stolen afternoons in sterile hotel rooms. Sophia wrote of Richard's passion, his intensity. He wasn't the steady, predictable, sometimes distant man Elizabeth knew. He was a force of nature, a torrent of desire and promises. He told Sophia he felt trapped in his marriage, that Elizabeth didn't understand him, that she was fragile, passionless. He says she's like a porcelain doll, beautiful to look at, but cold and empty inside. He says with me, he feels alive for the first time. He promises we'll have a life together. He just needs time. He has to be careful, for his reputation, for his business. For her, he says he doesn't want to break her. Each word was a razor blade, slicing through the tapestry of Elizabeth's marriage, revealing the cheap, ugly threads beneath. The business trips she'd packed for him. The late nights at the office she'd accepted without question. The faint, unfamiliar perfume she'd sometimes smell on his shirts, which he'd blamed on a new dry cleaner. It was all here, twisted into a love story that wasn't hers, a story of her own erasure. The diary's tone began to shift as the months wore on. The breathless passion was slowly replaced by a thread of anxiety. Richard's promises became vague. Soon became, when the time is right. His control, which had once seemed like thrilling dominance, now felt like a cage. He bought me an apartment. He said it was for us, a place we could be free. But I don't have a key to the front door of the building. He has the only one. He says it's for our protection. It feels like I'm his secret. His pretty little thing in a box. Then came the entry that made the air leave Elizabeth's lungs in a single, painful gasp. I'm pregnant. I told him tonight. I thought he'd be happy. He talks so much about wanting a legacy, a son. For a moment, his face was unreadable, a mask of stone. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He told me not to worry. He said he would take care of everything. But the way he said it, it wasn't a promise. It was a threat. Elizabeth felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, what was coming next. She was a mother. She had a son born in the spring of 2000. She flipped through the pages of the diary, her hands trembling so violently she could barely focus on the words. The entries became more erratic, filled with fear. Richard's visits became less frequent. His calls were cold, clinical. He wasn't a lover anymore. He was a warden. And then she found it. The entry that ripped the world from beneath her feet and sent her tumbling into a black, soundless void. It's a boy. The doctor confirmed it. Richard's son. He came to see me today. He had a plan. A horrifying, monstrous plan. His wife, Elizabeth. She's been unwell. A nervous breakdown, he called it. So delicate. He's checked her into a private clinic. A quiet place in the country where she can rest. No visitors. Doctor's orders. He said it so calmly. He said when the baby comes, he will take him. He will bring him home. He will tell everyone the baby came early, a preemie, and his fragile, confused wife will be so grateful to have her baby that she won't question a thing. He is stealing my son. He is giving him to her. Elizabeth dropped the diary. It hit the floor with a soft thud, a sound she didn't hear. All she could hear was a rushing in her ears, the sound of her own blood roaring in protest. The clinic. The rest cure. She remembered it now, through a fog of medication and induced confusion. Richard had told her she was exhausted, that she'd had a breakdown after a small, early miscarriage she barely remembered. He'd been so convincing, so caring. He'd held her hand and told her he would handle everything, that all she needed to do was get better. She had spent 2 months in that clinic, a place with soft-spoken nurses and locked doors, her mind swimming in a gentle haze. She had come home weak, thin, and grateful. And then Richard had brought him home. David. A tiny, perfect baby boy. He'd told her the doctors had been wrong about the miscarriage, that she'd carried the baby almost to term without realizing. He said it was a miracle. The nurses at the hospital, all paid by Richard, had cooed and confirmed the story. She, in her fragile, post-institutional state, had believed him. She had accepted this miracle. She had held this baby, her son, and loved him with every fiber of her being. Her son. Her hands, moving with a mechanical slowness, reached for the manila folder still sitting in the safe. Her fingers were clumsy, stiff. She pulled out the first document. It was a birth certificate. Official, Stamped. The paper was crisp. Name: David Michael Sterling. Date of birth: April 12, 2000. Father: Richard Sterling. She scanned down the page, her eyes searching for the one word that would make this a nightmare she could wake from. But there it was, printed in stark black ink. Mother: Sophia Rossi. It was real. It was all real. The love for her son, a love that had defined her for 25 years, was real. But the foundation of that love, the very biological truth of it, was a lie. He wasn't hers. He had been given to her. A replacement. A prop in Richard's elaborate, cruel play. The nervous breakdown wasn't a moment of weakness. It was her prison. It was the tool he used to steal one woman's child and another woman's sanity. A cold, hard fury began to burn through the shock, cauterizing the wound. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a violation of the most sacred kind. He hadn't just lied to her. He had hollowed her out and filled her life with his own monstrous secrets. Her grief for her husband was gone, evaporated. In its place was something diamond-hard and sharp. She looked at the name again, Sophia Rossi, the woman her husband had loved, the woman whose child she had raised. What had happened to her? The diary's last entries were frantic, terrified. He's taking him. There's nothing I can do. He has lawyers, doctors. He has all the power. I am trapped. He says if I fight him, he will prove I am an unfit mother. He says he will destroy me. I will never see my son again. He says this is the only way. I have to let him go. I have to disappear. Oh God, my baby. My little boy. That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank. Elizabeth's hands moved to the next set of papers in the folder. They were property deeds. Dry, legal documents filled with lot numbers and zoning codes. She almost dismissed them, but a name caught her eye. A deed of sale. For a house on 142 Willow Lane. David and Chloe's house. The house she had just refused to pay the mortgage on. She scanned the document, her mind numb. The seller's name was listed as The Estate of Sophia Rossi. The buyer was a holding company owned by Richard Sterling. The date of the sale was October 2000. 6 months after David was born, he'd bought the house from her estate. The word hung in the air, cold and final. Her trembling fingers found the last item in the folder. It wasn't a legal document. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and folded into a neat square. From the local Maple Creek Gazette. The headline was small, tucked away, on page 4. Tragic suicide in Willow Creek Estates. She unfolded it. A short 3-paragraph story detailed the death of a 28-year-old woman, Sophia Rossi, found in her home at 142 Willow Lane. The cause of death was ruled a suicide. The article mentioned she was a recent resident, a single woman who kept to herself. It expressed the community's shock and sadness. The date of the article was July 15, 2000, 3 months after she had given up her son. Elizabeth stood up, the papers scattering to the floor around her feet like dead leaves. She walked to the window and stared out at her perfect garden, but she didn't see the roses or the lavender. She saw it all with a sickening, horrifying clarity, the entire monstrous architecture of her husband's plan. He hadn't just given his son a home. He had installed him in the very house where his mother had died, a house he had bought for a low price from her estate, likely because it was the site of a tragedy. And then the final sadistic turn of the screw. He had created a financial arrangement disguised as a father's gift, a family investment that forced Elizabeth, the woman he'd wronged, the woman whose life he had built on a foundation of lies, to pay for it. For 20 years, she had been sending a check every month to preserve a monument to his cruelty. Every payment was an unknowing tribute to his dead lover. Every dollar was a link in the chain that bound her to his hideous secret. It wasn't a punishment. A punishment is meant to correct behavior. This was a perpetual display of power, a victory lap he forced her to run for 2 decades, long after he was in the grave. He was making her maintain the tomb of the woman he destroyed and the house of the son he stole. The air in the study no longer felt stale. It felt poisonous. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. And David, her son, he wasn't just the product of an affair. He was the living, breathing legacy of a lie so profound it had rewritten her entire existence. The grief was gone. The shock was hardening into something else. Something cold and clear, and absolutely resolute. She was not a fragile porcelain doll. She was the one left standing. And she had the truth, all of it, right here in her hands. The demolition was about to begin. The first 30 days were a study in silence, a new, unfamiliar kind of quiet that settled over my house, not as a void, but as a presence. It was the sound of a decision made, of a lock clicking into place. I had always measured my days by the needs of others. Now, I measured them by the sun creeping across my living room floor. The money for the mortgage, the payment I did not make, sat in a new account under my name only. I would check the balance on my tablet every morning. It was a small, glowing number, but it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. A seed of power. The first crack in the silence came not as a bang, but as a digital chime. A text from Chloe. Not a, "How are you?" Not a, "Thinking of you." Just a screenshot of a banking app with an arrow pointing to the mortgage account. The caption beneath it read, "Utba." I let the message sit for a day. I watered my plants. I read a chapter of a book I'd been meaning to start for a decade. I felt the phone buzz again. And again. Finally, I picked it up and typed a simple reply. "Having some trouble with the online portal, dear. I'll call the bank tomorrow." It was a lie, of course, the first of many. And it felt surprisingly easy, like slipping into a comfortable old coat. The lie bought me another week. A week of blessed, potent silence. Then, the certified letter arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope with a green stripe. I didn't even need to open it to know what it was. Pre-foreclosure notice. The words felt official, dangerous. They were meant to incite panic. For a moment they did. A cold flicker of the old fear, the old sense of duty. But I looked at the unopened letter, then at the tablet with my growing bank account, and the fear receded. This wasn't my panic. It was theirs. I left the letter on the hall table, a monument to my rebellion. 2 days later, my phone rang, and David's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath, summoned the ghost of the woman I used to be, and answered. "Hello, David." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tight, stretched thin with anxiety. There was no greeting, no preamble, just the raw edge of accusation. "We got a notice from the bank. A pre-foreclosure notice. It says the mortgage hasn't been paid." I let a pause hang in the air, filling it with imagined confusion. Oh dear. A notice? Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. It's right here in my hand. Chloe said you paid it. You told her you were handling it." I thought I did, David." I really did. I let my voice tremble just a little. I pictured myself as a fragile porcelain thing, easily shattered. The bank's website. It's so confusing these days. All the passwords and the little buttons. I must have done something wrong. A heavy sigh came through the phone, thick with exasperation. It was the sound he used to make when I'd ask him to help with the television remote. "Mom, this isn't the remote. This is the house. You have to be more careful. You need to call them right now and fix this. Pay it. Pay whatever late fees they've added." "Of course, dear. Of course. I'm so sorry. My memory. It just isn't what it used to be. It's like things just slip away. I'll take care of it right away, don't you worry." "Just get it done, Mom," he said, his tone clipped. "Chloe is freaking out. We could lose the house." He hung up. I stood in the quiet of my hallway, the phone still pressed to my ear. The fragile, confused old woman evaporated, and I was left standing there, solid as stone. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't shown an ounce of concern for my failing memory. He was worried about his asset, his inheritance, the house his father had given him. I walked over to the hall table and picked up the certified letter. I tore it in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. Another month bled into the calendar. The spring flowers in my garden began to fade, replaced by the deep green of early summer. The number in my secret bank account had doubled. It was a guilty pleasure, watching it grow, a dragon guarding a hoard that was never meant to be mine. I knew the second notice would be coming, more severe than the first. I knew another call would follow. This time it was Chloe. Her voice was pure ice. "Elizabeth, David told me he spoke to you a month ago." "Chloe, dear, yes, he did." "So lovely to hear from you." I was pruning roses in the backyard, the sun warm on my neck. I didn't stop. Snip. A dead bloom fell to the grass. "Don't dear me," she snapped. "We just received a notice of default." "Default, Elizabeth. Do you know what that means? The bank is starting official foreclosure proceedings. It's public record now. Our friends could see this. My parents could see this." "Oh my goodness," I said, my voice a whisper of manufactured horror. That sounds just awful. I was sure I fixed it. I went to the bank. I spoke to a very nice young man. I think his name was, what was it? Robert? Or was it Richard? It's so hard to keep track." "Stop it," she hissed. "Just stop it. I don't believe you. I don't believe you're this forgetful or this incompetent. You're doing this on purpose." Snip. Another rose. "On purpose? My dear, why would I ever do something like that? It's David's home." "It's my grandchildren's home." "I don't know why," she spat, her voice rising. "Maybe you're finally losing it. Maybe you're bitter and lonely and you want to make everyone else miserable. But I'm telling you right now, this will be fixed. One way or another, we will fix this." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the rosebush. It was thriving. I had spent 20 years paying for a house built on a lie, tending to a family that was not my own, while my own garden, my own life, had been neglected. No more. Chloe had said they would fix it. I knew exactly what that meant, and I was ready. The following Tuesday, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. I was in the living room, ostensibly reading, but I had been waiting. I watched as David got out of the passenger side. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. Chloe emerged from the driver's side, her face a mask of grim determination. She smoothed her blazer, a warrior preparing for battle. They weren't alone. 2 other men, both in suits, got out of the back. One was older, with silver hair and a sharp, predatory look. He carried a leather briefcase. The other was younger, with a softer face that seemed designed to project empathy, but his eyes were watchful, clinical. The lawyer and the psychiatrist. The intervention had arrived. I didn't rush to the door. I let them stand on the porch and ring the bell twice. I wanted them to feel the shift in power, to know they were on my territory now. Finally, I opened it, composing my face into a look of mild, pleasant surprise. "David, Chloe, what a surprise. And you've brought guests." "Mom," David began, his voice strained. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Can we come in? We need to talk." "Of course, dear, of course. Come in, all of you." I led them into the living room, the room Richard had designed, filled with his heavy, oppressive furniture. It felt like the perfect stage for this final act. They arranged themselves on the sofa opposite my armchair. David and Chloe sat close together, a united front. The lawyer, the silver-haired one, sat at the edge, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him with a soft thud. The psychiatrist sat a little apart, his hands clasped in his lap, observing me. "Mom," David started again, clearing his throat. Chloe placed a hand on his knee, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but was really a command. "Stick to the script. We're here because we're worried about you." "Worried?" I asked, allowing a note of confusion into my voice. "Worried about what, dear?" "About these missed payments," Chloe interjected, her voice smooth as polished marble, dripping with false sympathy. "About your memory. You're not?" You're not yourself, Elizabeth. You're forgetting things, important things. It's clear you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. I looked from her to David, whose gaze was fixed on a spot on the carpet. Is that what you think, David? That I'm not capable? He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Pity? It didn't matter. It was too little, too late. Mom, it's just, things are falling apart. We want to help. We need to help. The silver-haired man leaned forward. Mrs. Miller, my name is Arthur Graves. I'm the family's attorney. Your son and daughter-in-law have retained me to help navigate this difficult situation. We're all on your side here. My side, I repeated softly. I see. The younger man spoke then, his voice calm and melodic. Elizabeth, my name is Dr. Allen. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. I'm here simply to listen. Sometimes, as we get older, the stress of managing finances and a large home can become overwhelming. It can lead to confusion, anxiety. It's very common. They were a pincer movement, coming at me from two sides, the legal threat and the psychological diagnosis. It was a well-rehearsed performance. They were here to strip me of my autonomy, to have me declared incompetent so they could gain power of attorney, seize control of my finances, and fix the mortgage problem. They saw a frail, confused old woman, an obstacle to be managed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I let them talk. I listened as Mr. Graves spoke of legal protections and fiduciary duties. I listened as Dr. Allen asked gentle, probing questions about my sleep patterns, my appetite, my social life. Did I feel lonely? Did I sometimes lose track of time? Did I feel overwhelmed? I answered each question with a simple, quiet yes or no or I'm not sure. I gave them the rope. I let them fashion the noose and slip it around my neck. You see, Chloe said, her voice filled with triumphant sorrow. Oh, she knows it herself. She can't do this anymore. Mr. Graves nodded grimly. He clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Elizabeth, he said, his tone shifting from concern to businesslike. What we have here is a durable power of attorney. It's a standard document. It would appoint David as your agent, allowing him to manage your financial accounts on your behalf. He can make the mortgage payments, handle your investments, pay your bills. It's a way for us to protect you from yourself, to ensure your assets are secure and your obligations are met. He slid the documents onto the heavy oak coffee table between us, pushing them towards me. A pen was placed neatly on top. All you need to do is sign. This was the moment. The culmination of their plan, the checkmate they thought they had cornered me into. David stared at the papers, his jaw tight. Chloe's eyes were fixed on me, gleaming with anticipation. Dr. Allen watched with professional detachment. Mr. Graves leaned back, confident. I looked at the papers. I looked at their faces, a gallery of greed and betrayal masked by false concern. And I felt a profound Arctic calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was the truth, heavy and sharp as a shard of glass in my hand. I let the silence stretch, letting their confidence curdle into uncertainty. I didn't look at the papers they wanted me to sign. Instead, I reached for the small leather-bound book I had placed on the end table beside my chair earlier that morning. Sophia's diary. Before you have me committed, I said, my voice perfectly clear, devoid of the tremor I had feigned for weeks. Before I sign away my life to fix a problem with a house, you should know who you're committing, David, and you should know whose house you're trying to save. My words dropped into the room like stones into a still pond. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Confusion flickered across their faces. I pushed the diary across the polished surface of the coffee table. It slid to a stop just in front of the legal documents, a small, worn object against the crisp white paper. What is this? Chloe demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. A story, I said. Your story, in a way, or the one you were never told. David just stared at the little book as if it were a snake. Chloe, ever the aggressor, snatched it up. She opened it to a random page, her eyes scanning the faded, looping cursive. "What is this nonsense?" she began, her voice dripping with scorn. August 14th. Richard came to me again tonight. He swore he would leave her. He held my face in his hands and said the boy looked just like him. Our boy. He says we just have to be patient, that Elizabeth is fragile, that he has a plan to... Her voice choked. She stopped reading, her face going pale. Her eyes darted from the page to me, then to David, a horrifying understanding dawning in them. The mask of sympathy shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. "Read it, David," I said softly. "Or let me tell you. I have it all memorized." David didn't move. He was frozen, a statue of a man. So I told him. I started from the beginning. Not my beginning, but his. I told him about Richard's long affair with a woman named Sophia. I told him how she was an artist, how she had loved my husband with a desperation I could now, finally, understand. I told him how she got pregnant. "Your father didn't want a divorce," I said, my voice steady, relentless. "It would have been a scandal, bad for his business, for his reputation. He needed to keep his perfect family intact. He needed me, but he wanted you." I explained the plan Richard had concocted, the story of my nervous breakdown after a supposed stillbirth. The weeks I spent in a private rest facility, heavily sedated, while Richard arranged everything. I told him how he had forced Sophia to give up her baby, promising her he would raise the child as his own, that they would be a secret family. And I told him how Richard came to that facility and placed a baby in my arms, telling me it was a miracle, a child we had adopted at the last minute to heal my grief. "Your name is not David Miller," I said, looking directly into his unblinking eyes. "Not really. I saw the original birth certificate. It was in the safe with her diary. Your mother's name was Sophia Rossi, and she named you Leo." The sound that escaped David's lips was not a word. It was a raw, guttural noise of a man being hollowed out from the inside. His face, which had been tight with anxiety, seemed to collapse, the bones and muscles giving way, his identity wiped clean in a single brutal moment. "And the house," I continued, my voice dropping lower, colder. "The beautiful house on Sycamore Lane that you're so afraid of losing. Your father didn't just buy that for you. He was so much more poetic than that. It was Sophia's house. She owned it. He bought it for her when the affair began. It was your first home, for the few weeks she was allowed to keep you." I let that sink in. I watched Chloe's hand, still holding the diary, begin to tremble violently. Mr. Graves and Dr. Allen were silent, their professional masks slipping, revealing shock and a dawning awareness that they had walked into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple competency hearing. "He didn't give you a gift, David," I said. "He gave you a monument to his betrayal, and he made me pay for it. For 20 years, I have been sending a check every single month to pay off the mortgage on my husband's dead mistress's house. The house where she lived with the son she had with him, the son who was stolen from her and given to me. It wasn't an investment. It was a punishment, a trophy, a reminder, every month of his ultimate power." Chloe finally found her voice. It was a shriek, high and ragged. "You're a liar, a sick, twisted old woman. You're making this all up because you're mad about the mortgage. This is insane." She threw the diary onto the table. "You're trying to destroy him." She was right about that last part, but she was wrong about the reason. This wasn't about the mortgage anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the truth, a truth that had been buried for 45 years. David was catatonic, his eyes vacant, staring into a space I couldn't see. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own death. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial tone that drew them all in, even the lawyer. "I haven't told you the worst part." Chloe stopped yelling, her breath catching in her throat. "Sophia's diary doesn't end with her giving you away, David," I said, my gaze locked on his empty face. "It goes on for a few more weeks. She writes about regret, about realizing Richard was never going to leave me, She writes about wanting her son back, her Leo. I paused, letting the name hang in the air again. Her last entry is dated October 2nd. She wrote that she was going to confront Richard. She had bought a bus ticket. She was going to leave Maple Creek and take you with her. She was going to expose him. I looked at each of them, at the horrified lawyer, at the psychiatrist who was no longer analyzing me, but witnessing a complete psychological annihilation, at Chloe, whose face was a mixture of terror and fury, at David, who was nothing. The next day, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, the local paper ran a small story, a tragic suicide, a young, single mother found in her home. The official story was that she died of grief. But her diary suggests something else, doesn't it? It suggests she wasn't planning on dying. She was planning on living. As the last word left my lips, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the quiet house. I had left it unlocked. 2 men walked into the living room. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing the sober, practical clothes of law enforcement. One was older, with a tired face that had seen too much. The other was younger, his eyes sharp and alert. Mr. Graves shot to his feet. "Who are you? This is a private residence." The older detective ignored him, his eyes on me. "Mrs. Miller?" "Yes, Detective Harding," I said calmly. "Thank you for coming so promptly. I believe you'll want to read Sophia's final entry." I gestured towards the diary, still lying on the coffee table like a time bomb. "I called the Maple Creek Cold Case Unit an hour ago. I told them I might have new evidence regarding a questionable suicide from 45 years ago." I turned my gaze back to David, to the rubble of the man who was my son. "The foreclosure on the house is no longer the main event," I said, my voice resonating in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the room. "It's now a crime scene." The silence that followed the storm was a sound all its own. It was not peace. It was a vacuum, the dead air left behind after a detonation. For days, Elizabeth's world was framed by her living room window. She watched the ghost of David's life flicker and die across the street. First came the police cars, their red and blue lights painting silent, screaming strokes across her walls at night. They never came to her door. Her statement, given calmly with the detective she had called, was considered complete. They had Richard's crimes now, or at least the start of them. The investigation was posthumous, a quiet affair of digging up old files and re-interviewing ghosts. But for David, the consequences were immediate and brutal. She saw him through her window, a silhouette moving behind his own curtains. He looked smaller. The news traveled the way it always does in a town like Maple Creek. A low murmur on social media, a hushed conversation in the grocery store aisle. The story was a garbled mess of hearsay and speculation, but the key elements were there. The respectable Morgan family, the dark secrets, the suicide of a forgotten woman, the potential murder by a dead patriarch. David's name was tied to all of it. He was the product of the crime, the living, breathing evidence. The first real sign of the collapse was a high-end moving van that pulled up to his house a week later. It was not for a full move. It was surgical. Chloe's belongings. Elizabeth watched as men in uniforms carried out designer luggage, expensive art, and the custom-made ergonomic office chair Chloe had once bragged about on Instagram. Chloe herself never appeared. Her exit was as sterile and efficient as her phone call to Elizabeth had been. Elizabeth's phone buzzed once that afternoon with a text from a number she didn't recognize, but knew was hers. There were no words, just a single, vulgar emoji of a snake. Elizabeth deleted it without a second thought. It was a mosquito's buzz in the profound silence. David didn't fight the foreclosure. The notice appeared on his door, a lurid orange sticker against the dark wood. It was a public branding. He was tainted, his inheritance a crime scene, his money built on a foundation of lies and blood. No bank would touch him. He couldn't afford the mortgage payment, not now. He couldn't afford the lawyers to fight it. He couldn't afford the shame. He never called her, not once. He didn't scream, or accuse, or beg. In his silence, Elizabeth heard the truest accusation of all, that she had not just destroyed his life, but revealed it was never his to begin with. He was a phantom, and she had turned on the lights. She felt no victory. The calculated rage that had propelled her for weeks had burned out, leaving behind a fine gray ash of emptiness. She would wake in the morning and, for a single blissful second, forget. Then the weight of it all would settle back onto her chest. The house, her house, felt enormous, each room an echo chamber for a life that had been a performance. The grandfather clock in the hall, Richard's pride and joy, ticked like a bomb. One morning, she stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone on the wall. She thought about making coffee, then realized there was no one to make it for. The routine was broken. Everything was broken. She picked up her cell phone instead, her fingers moving with a slow, deliberate precision. She searched for top realtors in Maple Creek. She scrolled past the smiling, airbrushed faces until she found one that looked tired, a woman her own age with lines around her eyes that suggested she'd seen things. Her name was Carol. The phone call was brief, clinical. "I'd like to sell my house," Elizabeth said, her voice flat. There was a pause on the other end. "The Morgan residence on Elm Street?" Carol asked, a hint of professional caution in her tone. The whole town knew. "That's the one." "Are you certain, Mrs. Morgan? It's a beautiful property, a family home." "It's 4 walls and a roof," Elizabeth replied, the words tasting like dust. "I want it sold. I want it gone." The process was a blur of paperwork and quiet, respectful strangers walking through her home. Carol was efficient. She never asked why. She just measured rooms and took photos and spoke in hushed tones about market value and curb appeal. Elizabeth signed the papers on her dining room table, the same table where she had hosted decades of hollow Thanksgiving dinners. With each signature, she felt a cord being cut. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like amputation. She was systematically removing every part of her life, and she feared that when it was all gone, there would be nothing left of her at all. The house sold in less than a month to a young family from California, drawn in by the mystique and the slightly below market price. They saw good bones and a big yard. They didn't see the ghosts. Elizabeth didn't care. She took the money and deposited it into the same new bank account she had opened with the first mortgage payment she'd stolen from David. It was a war chest for a war that was already over. While the escrow paperwork was being finalized, she turned her attention back to the one thing that still tethered her to the past, the diary. She hadn't destroyed it. It sat in the empty office, on the desk where Richard had once ruled. She read it again, not for the parts about Sophia's affair with Richard, or the birth of David, or the murder. She read the other parts now, the frantic scribbled entries in the margins, the notes Sophia had made about things she'd overheard, things she'd pieced together. And there it was. A secret she had skimmed over in her rage, a detail that hadn't seemed important compared to the revelation of a stolen child and a murder. Sophia had been a meticulous chronicler of Richard's sins, perhaps as a form of insurance. She had written about Richard's fury, his paranoia, his control, and she had written about his hypocrisy. "He calls me a whore," Sophia had written in a cramped, angry script. "He says I am unclean, but he is the one with the real filth on his hands. He speaks of his barren wife, the fragile Elizabeth who could not give him a son. He does not speak of the child she did carry, the daughter, the one he made her give away. He came home the night it happened, smelling of antiseptic and rage. He said, 'We will never speak of this. It did not happen. It was a mistake, and it has been erased.' He thought I didn't know, but I heard him on the phone with the lawyer. A private adoption, a closed case, a daughter, erased from the world so his precious son could one day take his place. He punished Elizabeth for her one moment of freedom, her one brief affair while he was away. He took her child, and then he took mine." Elizabeth let the diary fall from her hands. A daughter. The memory, buried under decades of shame and fear and Richard's relentless conditioning, came roaring back. It wasn't a vivid memory, but a phantom limb, an ache she had carried for 50 years without ever daring to name it. A brief, desperate connection with a kind man during a lonely business conference Richard had forced her to attend. A discovery weeks later. The terror. Richard's cold, surgical fury. He hadn't yelled. It was worse. He had calmly explained how her life would be ruined, how she would be declared an unfit mother, a mentally unstable woman, how he would take everything from her. And so she had agreed. She had been sent away to a private clinic for women, a place of hushed whispers and quiet despair. She had given birth, held the baby for less than an hour, and then she was gone. A girl. He had told her it was a girl. Then he had brought her home and the subject was sealed, buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it was a fever dream, a hysterical fantasy. But it was real. Sophia's diary was the proof. Richard hadn't just stolen Sophia's child. He had stolen hers too. The hollow emptiness inside her was suddenly filled with something new, not rage. It was a different kind of fire, a low, determined pilot light. She hadn't erased her entire life by selling the house. She had only erased Richard's life. A part of her own life, a part she thought was dead and buried, was still out there. Her online search this time was different. Not for realtors, but for private investigators. She found an agency based in Portland that specialized in finding people from closed adoptions. The website was discreet, professional. She made the call. The man who answered, a Mr. Evans, had a voice like gravel and patience. She didn't give him the whole story. She didn't need to. "I'm looking for a daughter I gave up for adoption 51 years ago," she said, the words feeling alien and heavy in her own mouth. "Date of birth? Location of the clinic?" he asked. She gave him the details, the facts she had tried for half a century to forget. He told her it would be difficult. Records were sealed. Privacy laws were strict. It would take time and it would be expensive. "The cost is not an issue," Elizabeth said. "And I have nothing but time." She paid his retainer from the account that held the house money. For the next 2 months, as her old life was packed into boxes and driven away, she waited. She moved into a small, furnished apartment in a town she'd never heard of, a temporary holding pattern. Every few days, an email would arrive from Evans. Making progress on the clinic's records. Following a lead on the attending physician. The adoption was handled by a private firm in Eugene, trying to access their archives. Each email was a small spark of hope in the gray twilight of her life. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the final email arrived. The subject line was simple. Report. Amelia Hayes. Her hand trembled as she opened the attached PDF. It was a life, condensed into 12 pages of text and photographs. Her name was Amelia. Amelia Hayes. She was an architect, a very successful one, based in Phoenix, Arizona. There was a photo of her from her company's website. She had Elizabeth's eyes, the same shape, the same quiet intensity, but her smile was her own, confident and easy. She was beautiful. She was real. The report detailed her life. Her adoptive parents, both loving teachers, now deceased, her education at a prestigious university, her award-winning designs for sustainable buildings, her address, her phone number, her entire existence laid bare in a sterile report. Elizabeth printed the report, and for days, she just looked at it. She would trace the outline of Amelia's face with her finger, whispering her name. Amelia. What was she supposed to do now? Explode into this woman's life like a bombshell, the way she had exploded into David's. Wreck another family. No, she couldn't. But she couldn't do nothing. She bought a box of simple, elegant stationery and a good pen, and she began to write. She wrote for hours, the words pouring out of her, a 50-year confession. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for pity. She just told the truth, as stark and unvarnished as she could make it. "Dear Amelia," she began, "you do not know me, but I am your biological mother. My name is Elizabeth Morgan. I am writing to you not to ask for anything, not to disrupt your life, and not even, I think, to ask for forgiveness. I am writing because you deserve to know the truth of your own story, and because I cannot carry this secret to my grave. It is the last ghost I must exorcise." She wrote about Richard. She described his control, his coldness, the prison her marriage had been. She wrote about the brief, desperate affair, a search for a moment of human warmth in a cold life. She wrote about the pregnancy, the terror, and the clinic. He forced me to give you up, she wrote, her tears falling onto the expensive paper, smudging the ink. He told me it was the price of my mistake. He said he was erasing you, but you were never erased from me. You were a constant, silent presence, a question I was never allowed to ask. For 50 years, I have lived with the ghost of you, and I am so profoundly sorry. I was a coward. I was weak. I let him frighten me, and in doing so, I failed you in the most fundamental way a mother can. She told Amelia about David, about Sophia, about the house, about the unraveling of it all. She wanted her to have the whole, ugly picture. She ended the letter with a simple, stark admission. I have spent my entire life living in a house of lies. I have recently torn it all down. I find myself now, at 76 years old, standing in the rubble with no idea how to build anything new. Learning you were out there, and that you have a life, a successful one, is the first true thing I have held on to in a long time. I have sold my home in Oregon. I am moving, though I don't yet know where. I will not contact you again. This letter is my only intrusion. I simply wanted you to have the truth. It is the only thing I have left to give you. Whatever you choose to do with it, burn it, ignore it, or keep it, I will understand. I hope your life is full of happiness and love. You deserved that, and I pray you have found it. Sincerely, Elizabeth. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and mailed it. The act of dropping it into the blue mailbox felt final, like a funeral. She had said her piece. She expected nothing in return. It was enough to have spoken the truth into the void. The next day, she called Carol, the realtor. I need a referral, she said. A realtor in Arizona, near Phoenix. The Arizona sun was different. It wasn't the soft filtered light of Oregon that she was used to. It was a bright, white, relentless heat that seemed to burn away shadows. Her new home was a small, modern condo on the 3rd floor of a new development. It overlooked not trees and green lawns, but the vast, alien landscape of the desert, all rock and sand and stoic cacti. It was sterile, clean, and had no memories attached. It was perfect. She'd been there for 3 weeks. She had developed a new routine. She would wake before dawn, make coffee for one, and sit on her small balcony to watch the sun rise over the distant mountains. The colors were astonishing, pinks and oranges and deep purples that bled across the sky. It felt like watching the world being born new each morning. She didn't know exactly where Amelia lived, only that it was somewhere in the sprawling metropolis of Phoenix. She hadn't tried to find her. It was enough to be in the same state, breathing the same dry air. It was a quiet, one-sided pilgrimage. She had laid her truth at Amelia's door and walked away. The rest was not up to her. She was on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the first blush of pink touch the horizon, when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Her heart didn't just beat, it seized. It was a physical jolt, a current running through her. For a moment, she let it ring, the shrill sound an intrusion into her carefully constructed peace. Then, with a hand that was not quite steady, she answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice a dry whisper. There was a pause. She could hear soft breathing on the other end. "Is this Elizabeth?" The voice was low, steady, and professional. It was the voice of an architect. It was the voice of the woman in the photograph. Elizabeth had to swallow before she could speak. "Yes," she managed. "This is she." "My name is Amelia Hayes," the woman said, and the world seemed to stop turning. The rising sun froze on the horizon. I received your letter." "Oh," was all Elizabeth could say. It was a small, stupid sound. "I have to be honest," Amelia continued, her voice still cautious, measured. "I've read it about 20 times. I've had it for 2 weeks. I almost threw it away. I almost called a lawyer. I almost called you and screamed at you." "I would have understood," Elizabeth said softly. "Yes," Amelia said, and for the first time, a crack of emotion appeared in her professional veneer. I think you would have. That's what's so difficult. My parents, my real parents, the ones who raised me, they were wonderful. They gave me a great life. I never wanted for anything. They told me I was adopted, that my birth mother was very young and had made a hard choice to give me a better life. It was a simple, clean story. And I believed it. Elizabeth closed her eyes. It was anything but clean, Amelia. It was a mess. I was a mess. I know, Amelia said. Your letter. It filled in a lot of blanks I didn't even know I had. It sounds like you lived through a nightmare. They were quiet for a long moment, the silence stretching across the phone line, filled with 51 years of unspoken history. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a necessary one. A space for two strangers, bound by blood and trauma, to simply breathe in the same moment. I didn't call to blame you, Amelia said finally, her voice softer now. Or to forgive you. I don't think I'm there yet. I don't know if I'll ever be. I called because the story isn't finished. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? You wrote about standing in the rubble, Amelia said, her voice clear and direct. You wrote about not knowing how to build anything new. I'm an architect, Elizabeth. That's what I do. I build things, from the ground up. Another pause, this one full of a terrifying, fragile hope. I have a daughter, Amelia said. The words hit Elizabeth with the force of a physical blow. A daughter. A granddaughter. The line continued. Richard hadn't erased it. He had failed. Her name is Luna, Amelia said, and now her voice was full of warmth, the fierce, proud love of a mother. She's 10. She's smart and funny, and she asks a lot of questions. When I told her a little bit of this story, you know what she said? What? Elizabeth whispered. She said, so I have another grandma? Amelia chuckled, a soft, beautiful sound. Just like that. Simple. Clean. I think she'd like to meet her grandmother. Tears were streaming down Elizabeth's face now, but they weren't tears of grief or shame. They were silent, warm, and cleansing. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, as if Amelia could see her. We could get coffee, Amelia suggested, her voice hesitant again, as if testing the waters. Or lunch, no pressure. We can just see what happens. Yes, Elizabeth said, her voice finally returning, thick with emotion but clear. Yes, I would like that very much. They made a plan. A cafe halfway between their homes. Next Saturday. It was a simple arrangement, the beginning of a blueprint. After they hung up, Elizabeth stood on her balcony, gripping the railing. She looked out at the desert. The sun had fully risen now, flooding the valley with a brilliant golden light. It was the first sunrise that felt entirely her own. She had lost a family built on a foundation of lies, a structure rotten to its core, and she was about to meet a family that could, perhaps, be built on a foundation of truth. It was just a beginning. It was just a sunrise, but after a lifetime in the dark, it was everything.